Standing out means becoming a target. Need for Speed Heat. It's amazing, isn't it? This franchise has been alive since 1994, and this marks the 25th game in the series, counting the often forgotten Need for Speed Motor City. My journey with the Need for Speed franchise started out sometime around 1997, and along with Doom and Tomb Raider, helped launch me into the world of 3D video games. I got a chance to play around with the demos of Need for Speed 2 and Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuits, and with Need for Speed 3 in particular, I was absolutely hooked. Racing around what was at the time a very realistic-looking mountain pass in a Lamborghini Countach while running from chasing police cars was absolutely exhilarating, and playing the game with a computer that had a little bit of 3D cojones, courtesy of what was then a cutting-edge 3DFX Voodoo 2 graphics card with a whopping 8 megabytes of RAM, brought my experience to previously unseen heights of satisfaction. Yes, folks, this was back in the days when you had to have separate 3D and 2D graphics cards. Man, that brings back some memories. But anyway, I got sidetracked there for a minute. Let me refocus back on the game here. Throughout the years, I've owned a large majority of games in this franchise, and though I made exceptions as the years went on based on game content and review scores, I got a chance to view the official reveal trailer for Need for Speed Heat in August, and I was impressed enough to mark it down for purchase later in the year after its release. So how did it shape up? I'm Unreal, and this is a review from an average gamer. Need for Speed has evolved and branched off in a few different directions over the years, but more often than not, the focus has primarily been on racing either exotic supercars or highly customized tuner cars around improvised road courses with the police on your tail. Thankfully, unlike a few previous entries, EA and developer Ghost Games ensured that Need for Speed Heat would be a return to form of the foundations that made this series popular to begin with, and an attempt to right the wrongs found in the previous game, Need for Speed Payback. The game is set in a fictional location, Palm City, a clear carbon copy of Miami, Florida and the surrounding area, where by day, officially sanctioned and lawfully held racing events sponsored by speed hunters take place on closed courses for money, and by night, illegal street racing events are held on the dimly lit city streets, back roads, and open highways to earn your share of street cred. Now, as big of a fan as I am of the series, I'd like to state very clearly for the record, before I move on here, that historically, most of the stories for the single-player campaigns have been absolute garbage. From their most popular games like Need for Speed Most Wanted to their more recent games like the Need for Speed Reboot that was focused on online racing, they've been filled with horrible B-movie acting by racers who look like they belong auditioning for a shampoo commercial, nonsensical plots, outlaw car lingo that nobody on the earth would ever use, and the general appearance that their budget for shooting the cutscenes in each game is equivalent to what I spent at the grocery store each week. That being said, I'm very happy to report that this is not the case in Need for Speed Heat for the first time that I can remember. To start with, you are given the choice of multiple different avatars to choose from, perhaps with the idea of picking one that most closely resembles your actual self, though even the best I could do was a character with a faux hawk fade, punchable face, and clothing that made my character look like B-Rad from the movie Malibu's Most Wanted. After picking your character, you are quickly dropped into a prologue race that sets up your arrival in Palm City, giving you a taste of the action that you can expect when racing against determined AI opponents and the local police forces. After finding out why Palm City will be an interesting place for your high-speed adventures, your character stumbles upon a local car dealer that is somehow able to sell you some very sought-after cars in immaculate condition for bargain basement prices. These cars are enough to get you started in the officially sanctioned races hosted by speed hunters and to help you make a name for yourself on the streets at night. I chose a 64.5 Ford Mustang to begin with, though I quickly pushed that aside once I was granted access to my bonus cars, after buying the deluxe edition of the game that granted me several high-quality vehicles. I figured that would come in handy due to the MMORPG nature of more recent Need for Speed games that force you to grind out race after race, trying to scrape together enough money to keep upgrading your vehicles, or leaving you struggling to win races with an underpowered car before finally being able to afford a new competitive one for higher level races. And although the cars certainly did indeed come in handy, I was delighted to find that making money in this game actually isn't that hard, and desirable cars of any type, from any manufacturer, are perfectly obtainable by doing well in your daytime races. Enough patience, persistence, and first-place finishes will net you some serious cash and allow you to crush the competition in whatever style of ride you choose. As you continue to meet friends and family members of your first contact, you branch out into different styles of competitions, from off-road to drifting to sprints to circuits, all in the name of gaining rep and experience, unlocking new cars and races for you to play around with. But there is an obstacle, a big one: the Palm City Police Force. Much like the infamous Seacrest County or Rockport police forces from previous games, these departments exist seemingly almost solely with the intent of crushing street racers once and for all, and they pull out all the stops due to what must be a virtually unlimited budget, arming them with some seriously powerful pursuit vehicles, helicopters, and less lethal interventions to stop vehicles dead in their tracks. But worse yet, the officers of the Palm City Police Department seem to have little to no conscience or moral compass, and they paint a very dark picture of how law is enforced in Palm City. This is about as dramatic as I've ever seen a racing game storyline that I can remember, and I was hooked. Is it as compelling as Red Dead Redemption 2 or an Elder Scrolls game? No, but it raises the bar higher than I can ever recall from any previous game in the Need for Speed series, so EA and Ghost Games deserve great praise for that. Well done. The local racers are terrified of the police force, and even your own character doesn't offer up much in the way of defiance of the law when outside the relative safety of your own vehicle. After gathering up some money for clothing and a haircut to make my character look a little bit less like a South Beach douchebag, which by the way is all priced high enough to make the Amazon CEO's few remaining hairs stand on end, I immediately swapped vehicles and attempted to move through the story, which also to my surprise took a decent amount of time to clear. Without doing much in the way of unnecessary races, meaning that I didn't focus on beating every challenge on the map, but rather just enough stuff to work through the story, you can probably expect to finish the game's main story in about 11 to 16 hours, at which point you'll be left with plenty of other events to work with and the virtually unlimited replayability of the online portion against other human players. The ending does leave the game open for either an expansion or a sequel, and I'm not 100% sure what EA and Ghost Games have in mind for this, but I certainly wouldn't object to more story content from future DLC. Now that I got that summary of the campaign out of the way, let me elaborate further on the other parts of the game. Graphics are what they generally are for every other Need for Speed game. Pretty good. Car models are almost always great looking, especially with the potential power given to Ghost Games with the Frostbite engine, most notable for use in the Battlefield series of games. The buildings and some of the surrounding objects in the game world, though, not so much. Granted, the idea is for you to be rushing around the environment at up to 200 plus miles per hour, so the hope is that you won't notice. But when you start out, you won't be behind the wheel of a Ferrari Enzo, so cars aren't hitting 200 plus miles per hour just yet. If you take the time to really look around, or if you visit certain locations and happen to notice by accident, you'll spot some uninspired building design, awful textures intended to replace designing an actual building interior, and some lifeless looking streets. There are only 7 cars that comprise normal traffic in Need for Speed Heat. Yes, 7. There are also no pedestrians anywhere on the public roads, either during the day or at night, despite having huge crowds showing up for the Speed Hunters events. Now, I'm sure die-hard supporters or even people who worked on the game will say, well, that's because players will just try and kill the pedestrians. And maybe so, but games like the Driver series manage to work around that just fine by having pedestrians that merely get out of the way, and no matter how fast the player is going, it's impossible to strike them. EA is one of the wealthiest publishers in history, and because of that, I don't buy for 1 second that they couldn't have done that instead. Weather effects are decent, but nothing to write home about. There's plenty of rain, as this game does take place in Florida, but I have yet to see a horrible storm with tons of wind and debris flying all over the roads, which I should be able to expect once in a while, as hurricanes are a very real problem in Florida pretty much every year. As boring as the game world looks during the day, it's at night where everything comes together. The inner city races are filled with bright neon lights from the surrounding buildings and directional arrows. Police emergency lights illuminate the night sky as they chase you down, and you'll constantly be trying to avoid the inevitable catastrophic collision doing 200 plus miles per hour, especially during the later stages of the game when you are able to reach those ridiculous speeds with the cars you own. The main complaint I have about the city, regardless of whether it's day or nighttime though, is that it's simply too small. Grand Theft Auto V has this problem as well, where Los Santos is definitely the crown jewel of a very big map, but the rest of it is largely empty. Palm City is even smaller, and the ridiculous speeds you'll be traveling at make it so you'll cover those short distances even quicker, making the city seem even tinier. There's definitely a place for races that take place out on open stretches of highway or winding hairpin turns out in the middle of nowhere, but when the trailers focus on tight city streets lined with bright lights, heavy police presence, and obstacles all over, I expect that you're going to make that a big part of my experience, and it really isn't in the totality of things. The only way you see the city for any prolonged period of time is if you select a circuit race that makes you do laps through the same parts of the city over and over again. Otherwise, you're generally going to end up out in the sticks after you fly past a handful of concrete buildings and some bright neon lights. Engine and exhaust sounds are spectacular. I especially love that you get the chance to fool around with your specific exhaust sound. I love being able to take an already impressive-sounding Lamborghini or Porsche and turn it into a fire-breathing dragon that spits flames and sparks as it thunders, crackles, and pops with each time you step on the accelerator. The soundtrack is divided, and I do mean that literally. During the day, you're given upbeat Latin music with lyrics in Spanish and steady dance beats no matter what's happening in the race you're participating in, which sometimes is fine and it keeps up with the pace of the driving that you're doing. Other times, it kinda doesn't match up as well as it could. At night, though, the music starts to get darker, and the soundtrack is comprised more heavily of hip-hop and rap music, and in my opinion makes for better driving music, and better sets the tone of what you're trying to accomplish after hours on the streets of Palm City. I do actually play a handful of these tracks from the nighttime score in my car regularly since the game's release, so mission accomplished on that front. EA seldomly disappoints when making a soundtrack for one of their games. They used to be masters of picking the best unsigned bands or up-and-coming rock bands. See the Road Rash Jailbreak soundtrack or the Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 soundtrack. As they became wealthier, they transitioned into a company that picked some of the best big-name artists in the business. Controls are standard fare, and the handling characteristics of all vehicles are super arcadey, as is expected based on the last several Need for Speed titles. Though I'm still reluctant to say it's, quote, okay, that you can take a 90-degree turn at 200 miles per hour and come out alive on the other side, regardless of whether you use the handbrake or not. I'm not a big fan of the way you initiate drifts in this game, as now you're supposed to either use a double tap of the gas or brake pedal and more or less not touch the handbrake at all. Nor am I a big fan of the ludicrous pace that traffic is going to be coming at you as you hurtle down the road doing Mach 100 in a Lamborghini Aventador or a Koenigsegg Regera. Is the world supposed to be coming at you that fast if you're doing those kind of speeds? Yeah, but you're also not going to be doing those kind of speeds on public roads, especially when going through moderate traffic on tight city streets. I wouldn't mind doing 170 plus on a highway in this game, but you shouldn't be able to do it on other kinds of streets because you are going to crash. It will not be a matter of if, it will be a matter of when, and although this game is very forgiving with how much damage your car takes, if you swing through a gas station to repair your vehicle while you're out at night, you now have a limit on how many times you can actually do that, which I'm not a big fan of considering how the AI police stacks up against you in this game. And when I mention that, it's not because the police forces are super intelligent or that they're amazing drivers. It's because they stick to your rear end like glue virtually no matter what when you get to those higher heat levels. If you can retire early in the night with lower heat levels when only the Crown Victorias and Dodge Chargers are going to chase you, you stand a pretty good chance of outrunning them if you already have a lot of momentum going. But if you're staying at lower speeds, they're always going to keep up with you, or at the very least keep you in sight, even if you take a sharp, unexpected 90-degree turn, when in previous games, if you did that, they would fly right past you, then they would have to slam on the brakes, turn around, and try to catch up to you in vain. There are also no cooldown spots like you used to find in the previous Need for Speed games, nor are there traps you can set for chasing cars like knocking over a water tower or going through a gas station. And although there are some tools to help protect you from police interventions, you can't really fight back against the police the way that I remember you could in something like Need for Speed Rivals or the Hot Pursuit reboot from years ago. And quite frankly, police Corvette or no police Corvette, helicopter or no helicopter, I should not see any cops in my rearview mirror when I'm driving a Pagani Huayra at 220 miles per hour. Replayability is what you make of it. There are a lot of cars to choose from and even more ways to customize them, right down to doing a complete engine swap. Want an already insanely fast car with a brand new hybrid electric V12 engine in it? You got it. Do you want an 800 horsepower Miata that will embarrass an AMG Mercedes? You got it. There are some truly hilarious builds you can find on YouTube that other content creators share with people, and EA and Ghost Games have promised more cars in the future. The game is also most certainly not pay to win, it's play to win. Making money and overall progress is not that hard, and it's fun putting in whatever work is necessary to do so. While I'm not so sure this game will retain its player base the same way that Forza or Gran Turismo games do, there's plenty of fun to be had here, and if the developers keep up what they're doing and get continued support from EA Games, whether this game lasts for a long time or not, the future of this series is very bright. Overall, this game is an absolute blast and definitely worth your money. It's a solid thumbs up from me. While things like the size of the city, length of the campaign, and vehicle characteristics could be improved, there is excellent customization, compelling storytelling, and the constant threat of pursuing police vehicles, and there are clear reasons as to why this series has deserved its 25-game run thus far. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel to help me put out new content regularly. Until next time, I'm Unreal, and you've just watched a review from an average gamer.
Told you I was gonna mix it up.
About time you threw me a real test.